Hello again. My name is Masao Suzuki, and I'll be giving an update on the state of the economy today. I'm a member of the Freedom Road Socialist Organization, and I also write regularly on the economy and fight back news. So unfortunately for working people in this country, they're facing sort of a triple whammy at this time. The economy has definitely taken a turn for the worse. Retail sales in November, which is the latest data, just came out in the last week, dropped by over 1%. And then they also revised down the October figure, meaning it's fallen now for 2 weeks in a row. And in particular, the very important Thanksgiving holiday weekend sales were off 14% as compared to a year earlier. And this is including Cyber Monday and online sales. So the holiday sales season is definitely off to a very poor start. On the employment or unemployment front, there's also, unfortunately, more bad news. I'm sorry, I'll just be like pouring on the bad news, so maybe someone can ask me for some good news in the question and answer, but it's the reality of what it is. The new claims for the regular state unemployment insurance rose again. It hit 885,000 new claims for the week ending December 12th. And this is the second week in a row that the claims have gone up. And that's the first time this has happened since July. And even worse, the broadest measure that includes both the regular state unemployment, the federal pandemic unemployment assistance, or PUA, that goes for self-employed or formerly self-employed and gig workers, also rose, as well as the long-term benefits under the federal pandemic emergency unemployment compensation, or PEUC, and also the state extended benefits, or EB program. So that total is now over 20 million again. It dropped briefly under 20 million, but it's back over 20 million. And it's basically been there ever since April. So the job market is still down 10 million jobs. And recently, the pace of recovery of jobs has slowed. And I would not be surprised at all that come the data for December, that we'll find either no gain at all or even another drop. Another study showed the poverty rate has risen by almost a quarter since July and the expiration of the additional $600 a week in unemployment insurance benefits. It's now up to 11.7% of the entire population. And this is actually, of course, a gross underestimate of the US poverty line, because the poverty line uses data from the 50s and a formula from the 60s that way underestimates the amount of money that you would need to survive. So for example, family of three, the poverty line is like $20,000 a year. So if you can think of trying to support two kids on $1,500 a year, I mean, you're not just poor. I mean, sorry, not $1,500 a year, $1,500 a month. You're not, you're way below poor, in my view. And that's why, I mean, you can see in the news these, in fact, sometimes they don't even show it anymore because it's not news. It's just a new reality, a new normal of people lining up by the hundreds in front of food banks. And of course, millions of people are behind on their rent and under threat of eviction. So that's basically the bad news. Right now, more bad news. We're seeing record numbers of new infections for the COVID-19, record numbers of hospitalizations, and record numbers of deaths. And so I know one one hospital here in California, which has gone from being, the lowest third, which is good. No, I'm sorry, lowest fifth, the lowest 10 states, best 10 states in terms of having low rates of infection. And the last time I looked, now California is number 3, not in total infections. We're way past that, but just in terms of our rate, even adjusted for the fact we have the largest population. So I was watching a news report about a hospital in San Bernardino County in Southern California, where basically they said they were at, their ICU was at 300% of capacity, meaning they had 3 times as many people in the ICU, or in the, actually they're not in the ICU, they're in the, they took over half the lobby, they have a field hospital, people are in the hallways, yet the local board of supervisors is trying to sue the state to overturn public health restrictions. And, I just have to say that our governor, my governor, California's governor, a Democrat, Gavin Newsom, really isn't helping, even though I think some of his public health measures are necessary. But then, of course, it comes out that he was dining with other people, breaking his own rules at an elite French restaurant with a 3-star Michelin rating. And they, I looked them up on the internet. They have luncheons there for $1,200 a person, right? And so this is the type of restaurant that my governor in California is going to. It's certainly not a kind of restaurant that regular working people can go to, not at $1,200 a person for lunch. The pandemic is also hitting Europe especially hard. They have even stronger stay-at-home restrictions going on. It's and even in Japan, which has had relatively better numbers, their numbers are also rising. And so this is actually not good for the US economy, because Europe and Japan, are, along with Canada and Mexico, are among the US's major trading partners. So this is not good for the US economy. And again, when you look at both the economic situation and you look at the COVID situation, China, among large countries, really stands out. In fact, the total number of deaths here in the US on a daily rate is starting to approach. We had 3,600, a new high, and China has had a total of a little over 5,000 deaths from COVID-19. And so we may actually even reach what they do in total every day, which is a really bad experience. And their economy, of all the major economies, is also growing again. And just, this is sort of a random number because I looked it up on the internet, but last week, not last week, but the week before, China had an average of 23 new infections per day during that week. And that's in contrast to, we're building up over 200,000 a day, or 100, no, I'm sorry, 10,000 times as much. The numbers just get mind-boggling. And I guess the perhaps the worst thing of all, and this is something that is entirely, the fault of the system, political system here in the United States, is that the federal government has still not passed another relief bill. And I was hoping that by today, there'd be a relief bill and I could, say, well, this is good about it and this is bad about it. But the fact of the matter is they haven't passed a relief bill. They haven't even passed a continuing extension of a budget for this current fiscal year. So right now they're operating on a, first it was, I don't know, month to month and week to week, and now it's day by day. So if they don't pass a new extension for the federal budget by midnight tonight, parts of the federal government will start to shut down, which is exactly what this country needs at this time. And so it's not actually that clear for a number of reasons. One, the bill isn't written, so you can't analyze it. It's just constant negotiations going on. Two, they haven't released the drafts of the bill, so it's like people have seen parts of it, and then I think some of the news writers aren't, they're going secondhand off of what people say. So, for example, it's pretty clear there'll be some kind of unemployment insurance increase or extension past the current cutoff date, which is December 26th, but it's not really clear. I haven't been able to find an article saying these programs are definitely being extended and how much and so forth, and so on. And I think that one of the big problems is the Republicans have an advantage because they've shown themselves to be all too willing to basically bring down the economy if they don't get their way. And so you see really almost bizarre things like the Trump administration taking money away from the Federal Reserve that it had, and the Federal Reserve had been holding on to in order to make emergency lending in case of a financial crisis. And so while it's true that they haven't used this, sometimes people refer to the Fed's policies as having a bazooka. And so even though it's true they haven't had to use the bazooka in their efforts to salvage something out of the economy, it doesn't make any sense to take rocket-propelled grenades away, saying, "Well, you haven't used the bazooka in months, so you don't need it now." It's like, no, that's not the way you do it. But anyway, and you just hear, and the last thing I just want to end up is, unfortunately, we see more of what economists had started to call the K-shaped recovery, where you see new record highs in the stock market. You see Amazon, with booming business, has paid only $162 million over the last 3 years, that on over $25 billion in profit. So this works out to about 0.6% in terms of actual corporate income tax rate. And in contrast, the average US household pays about 15% of their income. This is just on federal income taxes, not including state income taxes or sales income taxes or payroll taxes. The actual tax rate is higher, but I'm comparing corporate income taxes with, there's some unauthorized cleaning going on behind me. So you can see this piece of protective cardboard magically appearing behind me on the screen. So anyway, it's just, obscene what these big corporations, not just the profits they're making, but they aren't paying taxes on it. And in part because of the 2017 tax cuts passed by Trump, and yet working people, those of us who still have jobs, are paying taxes at, like 25 times the rate. And so that's the last thing. I'll try and shift now to some questions, so keep your questions coming. I'll start with the last thing about, did the capitalists suffer in 2020? I think it depends on which capitalists you're talking about. The biggest capitalists is what I call the monopoly capitalists, where they are in an industry where it's dominated by just one or a few big firms, have actually done really well this year, like the example of Amazon, right? So Amazon has pretty much a dominant position in the online sales, and they've done really well. They're expanding, making lots of money, and of course, not paying hardly any taxes. I think even within industries that have been hit harder, like say, let's take the hotel industry, the biggest chains because they have a hotel and restaurant, the biggest chains because they have deep pockets, they have credit access. And for restaurants in particular, a lot of the chains have, like especially fast food, they have drive-through facilities. So they were much more easily able to shift over to like takeout, as opposed to many smaller restaurants, which are not set up for takeout, don't have easy access to lines of credit and so forth. And so I'm sure many of you have known different small businesses that have been just forced to close up shop. And so these small businesses I actually regard as part of the petty bourgeoisie or small bourgeoisie, and they in general have been suffering, while the big bourgeoisie, the monopoly capitalists, have been doing pretty well. How 2021 looks for them, I think in part I don't know. If I knew, I would have bought a one share of Berkshire Hathaway back in 1967 when it opened, and it'd be worth like, I don't know, $200,000 or $300,000 today. So I'd be retired right now. But and of course you could say, well, that's 50 years ago, Mr. Suzuki. But yeah, even next year, it's sort of unclear what's happening. The consensus view is things are, once the pandemic gets under control, things are going to just shoot forward. But I think the K-shaped recovery that I mentioned, where the biggest businesses are doing well, the smaller businesses are suffering. Among working people, a lot of the more skilled professional workers who are able to work at home. It's a hard transition for like myself. I'm a teacher, but I still have a job and I still have a paycheck. And the people have been hit really hard have been among the lowest paid workers in the service industries and restaurants, hotels, and so forth. And they've been hit really hard, first by actually the pandemic, even before the stay-at-home orders. I know I have a number of students who work in the hotel and restaurant industry because many of my students are from San Francisco. And I had a student telling me like his occupancy at his hotel, and he was at one of the big ones. I think it was a Marriott, but there's a bunch of Marriotts in San Francisco. He said they had a 3% occupancy rate. And this was just because people weren't traveling, business trips were being canceled, et cetera. I saw the same thing in my own favorite Chinese restaurant, where the actual, when the last time we went out to dinner, which was just a couple days before the stay-at-home order in my county. And I had been hearing about it, but I'd been noticing the number of customers dropping off. And so I said, there's not going to be that many people in there. I'm not that worried. And then my wife and I get in the restaurant at 6 o'clock on a Saturday night, and there is nobody else seated at the table. So, the food is good. The service was great, but it was like, I'm sorry, it was like eating in a cemetery. It was really gloomy and doomy, and I didn't know if that restaurant would survive. So I'm glad to say they're managing to hang on right now, but I'm not sure. So I'll just take a pass on 2021. We'll see what's happening, because the question, of course, is how long can the economy go where more and more of the income and wealth is just piling up at the top, and there's more and more people at the bottom. Well, it's not even at the bottom. It's like almost half the population are really suffering, short on food, behind in their rent, can't pay other bills. Once many states right now have, either because it's winter or because of the COVID, they passed restrictions on shutting off utilities, but in many places, unless the legislatures act, that could start up again. So it's really personally, I don't think that can go on forever, where you have more and more unbalanced economy. It's just, to me, not sustainable. But one commentator compared it to the old, I think it was a Wile E. Coyote. When he runs off the cliff, he just keeps going for a while, oblivious to it. And I'm afraid that's what might happen. Of course, it may be that he gets to the other side before the bottom drops out. So we'll just have to look forward. I think the main thing is we really have to look closely at what happens, what comes out of this relief bill, and some important questions besides the extension of unemployment are: is there going to be another eviction, an extended eviction moratorium? The CDC, I think, has extended theirs to January, but the economy is not going to be back in shape in January. So that needs to be extended. I've heard no news about extending student loan payments, because that's actually the single biggest type of consumer loan, of non-mortgage loan that households have, and amounts to over $1.6 trillion. And that really needs to be extended. And there really needs to be a big expansion of food aid, because a lot of people are prioritizing trying to pay at least some of the rent so they won't get evicted, but they're running out of food. And this sort of gets back to, I guess, the second question: do I think the economy will improve under Biden? Because that's related to the sort of first question of what's ahead for the capitalists in 2021. I think I'm hoping the pandemic will improve under Biden. I don't think he's a COVID denier, unlike our still current president. So I think he knows the COVID is there, but there's still going to be constantly the pressure to prioritize profits over people. There was a big struggle, I think, in the CDC advisory panel over whether they should prioritize essential workers or the elderly, who comprise almost half of all the, well, actually, if you count all the elderly, it's like over half of all the deaths. And so they did reach a compromise, because a month ago, they were saying, no, we're not going to prioritize the elderly at all. So they are going to prioritize people 75 and over, as well as some of the frontline workers, like teachers, for example. So I think the COVID situation will be better. I think Biden has, again, recognizes there is such a thing as climate change. He's not a climate change denier. Again, a lot of his policies are going to be shaped by the profit motive, but at least something will be done. In terms of the economy, in the upcoming year, again, it really depends on what kind of aid can get to those who have been hit hardest by the pandemic. And I'm not sure, I don't think Biden will either be willing or able to get through the kind of aid that's needed, because the Republicans have a good shot at still having a majority in the Senate. And given the way they've been acting, they're pretty much probably going to try to sink everything that will help people, hoping the economy takes a turn for the worse, and that will help them. They'll blame it on Biden and help them take back the House and also the president. So I've never been a worse is better kind of person, and now I'm glad I'm not, because that would put me in the same view as Mitch McConnell. Let's see. Going back to the vaccine, I mean, I'm really glad there's a vaccine. Actually, there's probably, I think, a second one. Moderna has been approved, and it's and the advantage of Moderna, it doesn't have to go out at like minus 94 degrees Fahrenheit, which is really cold, which really restricts it in terms of a lot of rural areas and smaller distribution sites. So I think that'll really help. But remember, it's going to be another 2 or 3 months before it starts making a difference, and could be as much as 6 months before it starts making a big difference. So it is going to be important for all of us to try and stay as safe as possible as we can, because it'll take time to get the vaccines out. And then also they don't have full effectiveness because both the, Moderna and the BioNTech, it's usually referred to as the Pfizer vaccine, but actually Pfizer didn't do any work on it. It's really done by BioNTech. It's a German firm. And the Pfizer did throw in a lot of money and is helping out with the distribution, as is the Chinese pharmaceutical company Fosun, which is usually just left out of the corporate news here. But also Fosun did not help with the actual development. They're just threw in money, which is important, and are going to be helping to distribute it. So it's going to make a difference in 6 months, but it's, unfortunately, I mean, with people, 3,600 people dying a day, it's not going to make a difference in the short term. And already we see some problems with the Trump administration. They evidently miscalculated the number of doses 14 states would get. And it's just unfortunately typical of the mishaps they've done when they're not in denial, they're incompetent. With the testing was a disaster, and then the personal protective equipment. So actually, while I'm glad to hear about news about the vaccines, and there are more coming, and I will definitely be there. I've actually asked my healthcare provider about it, but as far as it doesn't seem like I'm, because I'm not 75, not yet. I'm nowhere close to it, getting it. So there's a question. I've heard that one of the countries that's weathered the COVID better than others is Vietnam. And what have they done in contrast to more developed nations to stop the spread of the virus? I'll be honest, I'm not, I haven't studied the case situation with Vietnam a lot. There are a few countries in the Southeast Asia Pacific area that have done better. I think the thing with Vietnam, two things is, one is I'm guessing they're not as sort of integrated into sort of the global, tourist and travel network as some countries are, like say Thailand, which is not right next door, but one country over. It's both in Southeast Asia. I just don't hear, other than Vietnamese Americans, many people going to, say, from America to Vietnam, traveling and so forth. And so I think that's one thing. I think, of course, they do have a socialist society. I'm not that familiar with their healthcare, but I think the socialist countries, even though they have relatively different healthcare systems, have been able to manage the COVID better, because it really is a public health issue, not just a health issue. And the thing about public health is, I think the socialist societies are better able to prioritize saving people's lives over business interests and profit. So even though there is a private sector in Vietnam and China, in Cuba, but they aren't dominant. They don't control the government. They don't have a say in the different policies. So I think that they were able to do that. And then the last thing is, some of the Asian countries, because they've had scares or actually experiences. I'm not sure if Vietnam was hit by the SARS virus, which was about 15 years ago, but other countries that were took the whole pandemic a lot more seriously. And so, while it's a good thing the U.S. really didn't have a serious SARS outbreak, I think it's Americans as a whole we're not as conditioned to deal with contagious diseases. The whole focus is on more degenerative diseases, heart disease, cancer, diabetes, which are all serious things, but we could do a lot better on contagious. And I think it's just an example. If you looking back to the Ebola crisis, I like to use the example. There was a lone person from West Africa, unfortunately, was infected with Ebola, came to the United States, went to a medium-sized regional hospital in Dallas, and unfortunately, they weren't able to save him, and he died. But two of the medical personnel got infected. Very similar situation in Lagos, capital of Nigeria. It's a huge city. I think that's population over 10 million people. And so another infected individual showed up there, went to a hospital in Lagos. They weren't able to save him, but none of the medical personnel got infected because they just had better preparation and protocols, because a lot of the public health measures in dealing with contagious diseases are not necessarily super high tech. They involve wearing a lot of protective equipment, washing your hands, etc. And even though I know, I'll be honest, I know nothing about the Nigerian healthcare system, but the fact that they were able to better contain Ebola objectively than the US was says something about our healthcare system, where our best healthcare is among the best in the world, right? If I hopefully not ever need a heart transplant, I'll feel fine getting a heart transplant in the United States. But I won't feel fine because I'd be like, oh man. But I can't think of another country that would be like, definitely, I'd rather be there. But on the other hand, our average level of healthcare is not very good at all. That's just an objective reality. And our public health, I think, is obviously showing up to be even worse. And part of the big problem here is we do have a capitalist-oriented healthcare system, which has a focus on efficiency. And what that means in particular is trying to reduce the number of beds that are available, because empty beds are like wasted capital. And so unfortunately, California seems to have done a better job at that. We had some of the lowest numbers of beds per person in the country, and now we're really paying for it because everything, the two hospitals in my system were both at 0% ICU capacity a week ago. So I decided, well, I'm not going to look anymore. I just better not end up there. So that's a problem. But I do think fundamentally it's what you have when you have a socialist society. Along those lines, there's a follow-up question about China's trying to get the vaccine to more undeveloped countries because it's currently not accessible to them. Can you elaborate on that? Yeah, I think there's two problems here. One is a number of the wealthier capitalist countries have overbought vaccines, meaning they have bought more than enough vaccines to inoculate their entire population. And unfortunately, Canada seems to be actually the worst. They have contracts out for enough vaccine to vaccinate the whole Canadian population 5 times over, which of course you don't need to do. And the US is only 2 or 3 times. So I'm not trying to say US is worst at everything in this one case. And there's a lot to like about Canada, but in terms of, maybe you could just call it over-prepared. But the problem is, when you set contracts for all those vaccines, then it's not available to other countries. So that's problem number one. Problem number two is like both of the vaccines that the U.S. has, the government and U.S. companies have invested a lot in, that we're seeing now, the BioNTech and the Moderna vaccines, they're not that appropriate for most poorer countries because they require that refrigeration at, I'm sorry, not the Moderna one, the Pfizer, the BioNTech Pfizer Fosun one. It requires the negative 94 degrees or 94 degrees Fahrenheit below zero refrigeration, or what's more, super refrigeration, and that just makes it less accessible, and it's actually rather expensive to set up that system. And then a third thing is the U.S. is not participating. There's a global effort. I think it's called COVAX or GLOVAX. It's a global vaccine effort that many countries are participating in, but not the United States. So it's been labeled a case of, vaccine nationalism, where Trump is following through on his slogan of American First, which, by the way, that's actually a old fascist slogan from the 1930s that pro-Nazis used here in the United States. But the America First thing means that the U.S. is not participating, which means it is not contributing any money towards getting vaccines to the poorer countries. So China is participating in this, and they're also making arrangements. They have many contracts to sell the Chinese vaccines that are still being developed to other countries. And China has an advantage because they've been able to basically successfully suppress the virus. I mean, they still have a constant trickle of cases coming mainly from the outside, but through very extensive and intensive public health efforts, they've been able to control the virus. So they're not in a rush to vaccinate everybody the same way, we are here, just because it's so out of control. And so some countries are actually, and have at least one country has already approved a Chinese vaccine for use, and and other countries are too. And the Chinese vaccines tend to be ones, they have some that are more high tech. They're similar to the BioNTech and Moderna vaccine that use a messenger RNA. But the other ones they use the old, some would call it fuddy-duddy standard vaccination of getting disabled, crippled, or partially destroyed viruses as the vaccine. That's an old standard method. But the advantage to that is they don't need to be refrigerated, and also they're much easier and cheaper to produce and sort of mass produce. And so China has actually had great success with this strategy. When you look at solar cells, there unfortunately was an American company. They had a big old plant right along the freeway between my house and my dad's house. So I would pass it like twice a week, but they were focused on this high technology, much more efficient form of solar cells, but it was also much more expensive. And the Chinese focused on the regular old solar cell and just learned how to make it cheaper and cheaper and cheaper, and were able to dominate the market. So there's something to be said for that in terms of vaccines. And even if the vaccine isn't quite as effective, if it's cheap and easy to distribute, it'll actually be much more important in the short run. It's going to be very important in many other countries that, like, for example, India, that have, I think, next to the United States, and also Brazil has the largest COVID outbreaks. And so I think that. Good news for 2020. I'm sorry, I know there must have been dozens of comedians who use the same joke. It's not really a joke, but the first good news for 2020 is it's almost over. It's like 11 more days. Um, but of course, we have to realize just because it's January 1st, it doesn't mean that COVID's going to go away or the economy is going to start roaring again or Trump won't be president. None of those things will happen. But it is good. It is almost over. I'm sure, I think most of us, not everybody, because there's there's 300,000, more than 300,000 Americans dead and their families. I doubt they can find much good to justify that kind of loss. There's also many people who have suffering from long-term effects of COVID. It's hard to find any good people who've had to basically sell everything, sell their car, sell their positions to try and keep their family fed and so forth. It's hard to find anything good. So I'm sure. I mean, I do try and find something good every day, and I encourage everyone to try and do that. But I don't want to come off in any way diminishing the very serious and tragic situation that we find ourselves in. I would say, let me just back up. The one good thing I think was actually a historic event, and I'm sure there are other events on a smaller scale, was the nationwide uprising in the wake of the George Floyd killing. It was really unprecedented. I was someone who grew up in the 1960s, or was growing up during the 1960s. So I remember many of the urban rebellions that were going on. And so while what happened in the wake of George Floyd, the scale of multiple uprisings across multiple cities, it didn't quite go there. But in terms of the numbers of people that were involved, in terms of also the very multinational character of the movement. And, I was particularly pleased to see the large number, especially of younger Asian Americans, and including some prominent Asian American athletes in particular from the Midwest who are supporting the movement. I think that was probably the best news out of it. I work with the National Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression that was actually formed just over a year ago, reformed last November. It really started back in 1974 in the wake of the effort to free Angela Davis. And it was a great refounding. And I think the different branches and affiliates of the Alliance have done real work in trying to maintain more consistent actions to fight police crime, jail, killer cops, to throw out corrupt and pro-police district attorneys and killer sheriffs, corrupt sheriffs. And of course, to advance the demand first raised by the Black Panther Party for community control of the police. And so I think in some ways, that's the good news, is I feel the people's movement is, although we've had a lot of troubles, challenges, I should say, but we've met them, in terms of having mass protests. And, you look at the George Floyd protests, the overwhelming majority of people protesting are masked up using car caravans when the situation got serious. And so I think the movement is in good shape. And I think that's really important because someone asked, will the economy improve under Biden? And so I think Biden, unlike Trump, can be pushed to do some better things, but it's only going to happen if the people's movement is strong and we lay out demands and we really push the system with our demands, that then things will get better. They're not going to just naturally get better on their own, and we have to both fight the the wrecking activities of the Republicans as well as the pro-business orientation of most of the leading Democrats, including the only one I mentioned and criticized by name is my own mayor, my state's mayor, Gavin Newsom's a Democrat. He's part of the pro-corporate wing of the Democratic Party. So it's going to take a lot of pushing to do. But I think that is perhaps the best news. And of course, if you want to find out more about the movement, or if you want to find out more about making a more fundamental social change and the fight for socialism, I urge you to check out the Freedom Road Socialist Organization. You can go to our website at frso.org/join. And I look forward to, I've been meeting new activists here in the Bay Area, and I look forward to, I'm sure there's people all over the country. Some of you might even be listening to this right now who we look forward to meeting with you, working with you, and fighting for the people together with you. I think that's it. Thank you very much. And we'll see you probably next year. All right, so everyone have a happy new year and best wishes for 2021.